Revolution in Iran. A revolution that swept away all traces of the Shah's regime and ended an era. A few days early in February saw the people take up arms, driving the army from its barracks, storming police stations and opening up the jails. On the surface at least, it was a revolution carried out in the name of Islam, and it was masterminded by a man who was all but unknown to the world until just a few months ago, the Ayatollah Khomeini. The 78-year-old Ayatollah has been a lifelong opponent of the monarchy in Iran, and it was for his persistent criticism of the Shah that he was exiled 15 years ago. For the Ayatollah believes the teachings of Islam must control all of man's activities, and that includes government. The crowds that shouted in favor of the Ayatollah were equally jubilant about bringing an end to 51 years of the Pahlavi dynasty, the Shah and his father before him. Statues of Reza Shah dominated Tehran's main intersections, but the uprising saw them ripped from their pedestals and abused. It's less than a decade since the Shah led celebrations marking the foundation of the Persian Empire 25 centuries ago. But this time, the Shah was abroad, a helpless onlooker, leaving behind in his Niavaran palace many of the family's treasured belongings and the gifts he'd received over the years from visiting heads of state. This filming was laid on by the palace in order to give the lie to reports that the Shah had taken the treasures with him. But even this didn't stop the widespread rumors that he had transferred enormous sums of money abroad. Everything was left as if the Shah was about to return at any moment, for officially he was simply on holiday, albeit an extended one. He visited Egypt, then Morocco, and there he's since suffered the humiliation of seeing 17 of his entourage, including trusted aircrew, bodyguards and servants, fly off in the Imperial Boeing 707 back to Iran. Once back home, they said only 4 Iranian servants remain at the Shah's side, 3 colonels and 1 major in the bodyguard. And it's said that even they plan to return home, because anyone still paying allegiance to the Shah would be branded as a traitor by the revolutionary leadership. The Shah's plan had been to keep a low profile during the unrest and to make various political concessions, hoping to return perhaps as a constitutional monarch. One such concession, political prisoners were released from jails. Many had been charged with distributing anti-Shah literature or of belonging to banned opposition movements.
Speak English.
Free, their mood wasn't only one of relief, but also of anger, and they weren't afraid now to speak out.
Can you ask her how long she has been in prison?
4 years and few months.
And why was she in prison? Does she know why?
Sorry?
Does she know why she was in
میدونید چرا
prison?
در زندان بودی؟ جرمتون چی بود؟
چیز اتهام به سازمان مجاهدین.
عضو سازمان مجاهدین خلق بودن. عضو سازمان مجاهدین. She was a member of the guerrilla movement in Iran.
The concessions by the Shah proved to be too little and too late. Though one of his last acts before leaving had been to appoint a civilian government headed by Dr. Shapur Bakhtiar, a former opponent. If he could establish a strong government and stability with the promise of elections 6 months ahead, the Shah might still have a chance to return. But the Bakhtiar government was put under extreme pressure from the beginning. Though Bakhtiar sent emissaries to France to negotiate a possible compromise with the Ayatollah and even offered to visit him in person for talks, Khomeini refused to receive him unless he first resigned. He also branded Bakhtiar's government as illegitimate because it had been appointed by the Shah. The Iranian army, especially the Imperial Guard, frequently seen displaying its strength, was expected to play a crucial role. At first, Bakhtiar's government had the army's support. The Shah had spared no expense in equipping his forces with the latest weaponry, and latterly with riot control gear. And even hard-bitten correspondents who were invited to the Ashratabad barracks to view the troops admitted they were a frightening sight. There were several reasons why the Shah felt he could rely on the army to protect his interests. First, every officer over the rank of colonel was his personal appointee. Second, many officers were said to be involved in corruption, and that knowledge gave the Shah a hold over them. Third, many had been trained in America and followed the American policy of support for the Shah. But could these factors really secure the army's loyalty in the face of such massive popular support for the Ayatollah? The holy city of Qom, south of Tehran, one place the army and the police did not control even before the Ayatollah's return. These two men who'd robbed a pottery store were arrested not by regular police, but by Islamic guards, because the gendarmerie had ceased to function. The 500 Islamic guards in the city don't carry weapons. They wear armbands instead, and they fill a vacuum left after the rejection of state authority here. For instance, it's some months since everyone stopped paying taxes in protest against the Shah. This gave added importance instead to the traditional religious taxes. The money collected in this way provides welfare for the needy and finances 2 clergy-run hospitals and other services. It all means a resurgence in the fortunes of the mullahs, the Muslim clergy, especially here in Qom, the hometown of Ayatollah Khomeini. Under an Islamic republic, which was always the declared aim of Khomeini, democracy would be based on the Quran, the basic laws of Islam. He himself foresees the difficulties, and he is on record saying that there's not a single true Islamic state in existence today where social justice is practiced. He would strive for the ideal society, as envisaged by the Prophet himself. Khomeini is a Shia Muslim, the sect to which 9 out of 10 of Iran's people belong. The estimated 180,000 mullahs in the country will now have an important role to play in educating these masses towards the Ayatollah's goal. The Ayatollah Khomeini spent the final year of his exile in a small town near Paris. But at the beginning of February, he set off for Iran, fulfilling his promise to his followers. Khomeini was last in Iran in 1963. He was then exiled by the Shah to Turkey, and 2 years later he moved on to Iraq. Then in 1978, in a misjudged act of solidarity with the Shah, the Baghdad government expelled him to Kuwait before he settled in France. From this base, he continued to organize the Muslim opposition from a distance, his traditionalist sermons being delivered, curiously, by that device of modern technology, the tape cassette. With the Shah gone, the time had come for his return. Once aboard the chartered jumbo jet, though, there were still some anxious faces. There had been anonymous threats to blow up the plane, and the army had closed Tehran's airports for several days to keep him out. As it turned out, troops and police were hardly in evidence when the aircraft circled the city before coming into land. The airport was entirely taken over by opposition leaders and Khomeini's supporters. The Ayatollah's flight home spelled the end of the Bakhtiar government as an effective administration. All the time, Khomeini had refused to compromise in his demands. So it was with a completely untarnished image that he set foot in Iran after 15 years of exile. Khomeini's first public words at the airport were typically uncompromising. 50 years of betrayal are over, he said. The roots of the monarchy will be thrown out forever. The whole city was in an uproar, giving Khomeini a welcome that few individuals can ever have experienced. Drawing strength from such support, his first major step was to name Mehdi Bazagan as his prime minister designate in a provisional government, the government of an Islamic republic.
Without regard to your affiliation,
Bazagan had long been a principal supporter of Khomeini inside Iran. He's regarded as being on the political right, an indication perhaps that the Ayatollah intends to pursue conservative policies in spite of the presence at his side of left-wing radicals who wanted the revolution as much as he did.
which were being built.
The crowds that took over the streets in these early days were clearly behind Khomeini's choice, for him and Bazagan and against Bakhtiar. If Khomeini had outmaneuvered Bakhtiar, though, there still remained the threat of the army and possible bloodshed. This man was ready to support Khomeini all the way.
He is a great man, a great revolutionary man. I think he's a big man in Iranian history. Do you know what's my name?
And if he calls you to fight a holy war, what will you do?
I do it.
But how will you do it? Do you have the weapons?
Yes, we have.
What else do you have?
And there was fighting to come. It started at the Farahabad Air Base in eastern Tehran. Air Force cadets there began demonstrating openly in support of Khomeini, so Imperial Guard units moved in to suppress them. Thousands of civilians rushed to back the demonstrators, some bringing weapons to add to those seized from the armory by the rebellious cadets. The exchanges of fire were fierce and prolonged. It was the first internal clash between sectors of the armed forces, and it was a fight neither side could afford to lose. It was the pro-Khomeini rebels, though, who won the day. Their advantage lay in their numbers and their determination, and simple firebombs proved deadly weapons in this kind of fighting. The casualties in the first day of serious fighting were believed to be 100 killed, with hundreds more injured. The Air Force now began coming out in support of the Ayatollah more and more openly. Officers from other Air Force bases marched, still in their uniforms, with members of the public, and they began distributing their weapons to Khomeini supporters. Khomeini's repeated appeals to the armed forces not to fire on the people, with the implied call on them to support his cause, began to take effect. Events now began to happen very fast all across the city. The big army barracks of Ashratabad in central Tehran was the next trouble spot. At first, angry crowds confronted guards through the gates, but many of the demonstrators were armed and ready for action. The barracks was soon under siege, and firebombs were tossed over the walls to add to the confusion. It also gave the chance to others to scale the barracks walls as a full-scale attack was launched. Again, the popular forces won a victory through sheer weight of numbers. They were glad to be part of the revolution, and after winning control of the barracks, they proceeded to carry off all the arms and equipment they could. The general scene was of chaos rather than organized rebellion, and on occasions the Khomeini supporters took the law into their own hands. 2 army chiefs were captured and assassinated before officials could intervene. The Ayatollah himself warned that people who continued to loot and damage property would be charged with treason. But for a time, many were infected with the mob's abandon. With the shackles of the Shah's regime removed, freedom was a heady and exciting experience. Also to fall the same day was Tehran's central police station. A hail of small arms fire, backed by 2 armored cars captured earlier, was enough to put the police station in rebel hands. It's at this police station and a neighboring one close to the Parliament building that for years political prisoners have been interrogated. Until this moment, they had been places to fear and despise. Now the revolutionaries gave vent to their hatred in an orgy of destruction. Under the Shah's rule, the inside of any police station was the last sight a member of the public would relish. But at the height of the revolution, it was different. Crowds waited for a chance to view the cells and to sift through the evidence of repression. Hundreds went on inspection tours, looking at the piles of records kept by the dreaded Savak secret police on suspects and prisoners. Many of the visitors wanted to take souvenirs, but agents of the Ayatollah waited outside to confiscate papers, books and personal articles from pilferers. Cabinets full of intelligence material were transported to Khomeini's headquarters, while coaches were pressed into service, gathering up piles of arms and ammunition.
Where are you from, sirs?
At the headquarters of the Ayatollah, news was coming in of more and more victories by his supporters. But it was a strange alliance of revolutionaries that was fighting to topple the Bakhtiar government and the forces of the Shah. For while the fighters were united in their battle, they'd taken up arms for a variety of reasons. There were several brands of guerrillas on the streets. The Marxist Fedayeen, partly armed and financed by Libya and the Palestinians. There were also cells of the domestic Tudeh Communist Party. And of course, masses of Muslim militants dedicated to establishing a new regime for Iran, a strict Islamic one, under which the authorities would be stern but even-handed, with far less of the corruption that had tainted law and order before. At this time, there was the real danger of anarchy on the streets. In an effort to counter it, the Islamic Revolutionary Committee, set up by Khomeini, called on everyone to surrender captured or illegal weapons to collecting points at mosques. In fact, an estimated 70,000 weapons seized from military bases had found their way into private hands. One example of the nearness to anarchy was the attack on the United States Embassy carried out by Fedayeen guerrillas. They used machine guns in their assault and caused considerable damage, though only one person was killed. This was mainly thanks to the intervention of the Ayatollah's own militia in response to the Americans' appeals. At about the same time came the assault on the Niavaran Palace. The guards fell back and the crowd swept in. Reporters were comparing the scene with the storming of the Bastille. The cost in human suffering was high. The casualties in 3 days of fighting were over 700 killed and many more injured. With the collapse of the old system, it was the Ayatollah's council that organized the running of ambulance fleets, while hospital services have been on his side for months following the excesses of the Shah's forces in previous months. On occasions, demonstrators, shot down in the streets by the Shah's troops, had been assaulted in their hospital beds. As the security situation deteriorated, the main airport became crowded with foreigners leaving the country, usually at their government's orders. The revolution is a nationalist one, and for the time being at least, foreigners just aren't wanted here. Many were allowed to leave only in the clothes they stood up in.
How long have you lived here?
A year.
How do you feel about going?
I didn't want to go.
Where are they taking you to?
We don't know.
One of the revolutionaries at the airport expressed his views of Americans in the strongest of terms.
The gentleman is saying that we are very proud, very pleased that we're chucking them out. They've been here very long and they've been sucking our blood. And we prove to the world that we can get our rights back.
Another target of the revolutionaries was the Israeli diplomatic mission. It was hit by a unit of Fedayeen, many of whom are trained in Palestine Liberation Organization camps. The Shah's Iran supplied Israel with much of its oil, but no longer, and the effects of that could be profound. With Iran and Islamic Republic, Israel will be denied oil, and though Iran's not an Arab country, it could play an important role in the Palestinians' confrontation with Israel. It's a point not lost on the PLO leader Yasser Arafat. who wasted no time in flying to Tehran to see at first hand what was happening. Arafat clearly enjoyed listening to one of Khomeini's closest aides, Deputy Prime Minister-designate Ibrahim Yazdi, who was asked questions at the ransacked mission about Iran's future policy towards the Palestinians.
Will be giving active support to the PLO in its struggle.
What the reporter wanted to know was whether an Islamic government would give active support to the PLO in the future.
From the very beginning, we would not recognize Israel. We have been fighting against Zionism, so definitely it will be a part of the continuation of what we have been doing in the past.
Is that going to include, for instance, some of the weapons and some of the oil which is now at your disposal?
I think well, these details must be talked later. See?
Thank you.
Arafat has already appointed one of his aides as the PLO envoy to Iran, and now the old Israeli mission building will be a new Bureau of Palestine. It was a proud moment for Arafat, and a clear sign that there will be far-reaching political changes in the region when the new government is firmly established. If Khomeini's plans are realized, it can be expected to be against Israel, against the capitalist West, and against its Soviet neighbor. But that's a big if. Iran's position and its vast oil reserves make it a rich prize in the superpower struggle for influence. So external pressures are likely to be heavy in the months ahead. Equally important, the real distribution of power inside the country is still not settled. The Iranian people have so far been united only by their desire for a revolution. They now have to agree on what kind it will be.
Shah